Don DeGare, have been on a media diet. What does that mean? It means I'm trying to do like a keto media, psychic keto, high protein. What is your high protein media? For me, high protein media is Doomberg and Canadian Prepper. They've had several interviews together, but I watched an interview.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you there really quickly, Don, because just so we're clear, those are two different media personalities. One of them is someone named Doomberg. That's a play on Bloomberg. And they're a very interesting, like, kind of geopolitical.
The opposite of Bloomberg.
Yeah, it's a geopolitical, it's a commodities trader, financier, commentator channel. Very interesting person. And the second person is Canadian Prepper, who is a kind of a classic, ready for the apocalypse, ready for collapse of society kind of guy. I believe he's located in Western Canada. So I just wanted to say, to interpret what Don just said, because I'm not sure the audience captured it. These are two people who Don really appreciates and influences a lot of his worldview because they share very credible ideas.
That was great. Thank you, Brederick, for that interjection. Yes, audience, Doomberg runs a Substack, great Substack. It's a paid Substack, but you can read the stubs of the articles for free, and even the stubs are very informative. Doomberg likes to write about economics topics in depth. They had one post, for example, that was called Magnesium PI, talking about global magnesium markets. I mean, they'll get down into the specific chemicals and elements and then trace them through the global economy and talk about the implications. Canadian Prepper primarily runs a YouTube channel, but also sells prepping supplies on his web store. Mm-hmm. I've been following Canadian Prepper since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022 because I thought that Canadian Prepper, of any of the channels I could find on YouTube, had the best non-propagandized content. And I think that comes from, one, him being Canadian and not American, and two, being located in the Western Hemisphere, in North America. He was still forced to think kind of from the point of view of your average American because, you're pretty closely tied to the United States. But he was able to take a step back from a lot of the politicization of news. So when these two guys jump on a podcast together, it's going to be fire. All right, that was a good preamble. Here's what they talked about. And I sent this interview to Brederick, and he listened to it as well. It was a long interview, like an hour and 20 minutes?
Something like that. I just had a long drive. That was the only reason I was able to fit it into my life.
Thank God for long drives, giving opportunities for such a thing.
Maybe you can tell us about like kind of the key focus that you found interesting in the way that they described markets, because they said a lot of stuff, man. And we don't have all time, all day.
Yep. If I can summarize it as briefly as possible, Canadian Prepper and Doomberg had a fundamental disagreement that they spent most of the interview arguing back and forth. Canadian Prepper believed that the oil market has been manipulated ruthlessly. If for any of our audience that remembers, a war started in the Middle East between the United States and Iran and some other parties, and people expected oil to hit like $150 a barrel. It did not. In fact, people were kind of shocked, many people, when oil futures stayed under $100, even during even before the Memorandum of Understanding. Doomberg claimed that this actually was not market manipulation and there was some logic to it. And that precipitated this very interesting discussion that Brederick and I are going to try to break down the details for you, the interesting details. So that's it. Media diet. There's a great argument. Was the oil market manipulated or not? Canadian Prepper says manipulated. Doomberg says not manipulated. Don and Brederick will get into why. So, Brederick, what did you think about the debate that they had? And who did you side with?
Well, I always appreciate debate is a strong word. It was a nice discussion, similar to the ones we have on the program here. They were definitely people who respected each other and appreciated each other, and just had different opinions. And we used to be really good at that in America, actually. And that has fallen apart in the last couple of years. So in that spirit, we're going to try to kind of bring some of that back. So I thought that everything that Doomberg was saying made a lot of sense. And basically, his entire argument was the stock market versus the commodities market, specifically the commodities within oil, are very different. And the reason that they're different is because the whole purpose of the oil futures and commodities market is to get raw crude oil from wellheads to refineries. Whereas the purpose of the stock market is to raise kind of risk capital for corporations to invest it back in the business and then hopefully bring a return on that risk capital. But there's something quite different about the oil market, and that is the fact that you actually have to deliver the oil and you actually have to use the oil. And oil is what is called a semi-perishable product, which means once it comes out of the ground, it actually has like a lifespan. It doesn't live forever. It degrades. So his basic argument was saying that like the mechanics of that market, because of that, are very, very, very different. And also due to the fact that the distributors are all around the world, the players are all around the world, the consumers are all around the world, and the magnitude of the market is so gargantuan in terms of the dollars and the physical quantity of materials just moving around that it's like basically impossible to manipulate.
There are levers that you can put your hands on that you can yank, like emptying a strategic petroleum reserve, but you can't manipulate the market in the way that maybe people were imagining. Right. I think Canadian Prepper was kind of imagining I'm not going to lie. I thought the same thing watching oil futures over the past few months. I think both Canadian Prepper and myself assumed that there was like this secret group in the government that was contacting all different oil companies and being like, you need to sell at this price. You need to do things at this price. If you don't, we'll disappear you or will, release compromising photos. Where Doomberg was like, no, it's a little more, it's more complicated and it's more simple. He kept using the phrase forcing function, which I thought was interesting. This function in the structure of the market that forces behavior. And comparing it to the stock market, like he said, a barrel of oil is worthless until it gets to a refinery. And there's exceptions, which Canadian Prepper brought up. Like sometimes you can burn crude for electricity, but it's not very common. For the most part, like it needs to get to a refinery, and as you said, it's perishable. A stock can live forever, and with that, there's no forcing function, like he said, that is dictating the flow or dynamics of this thing. It's just created, and then there's an infinite auction, bidding the
and
price up to wherever.
And you can create more of them, which is there's a term in a lot of these commodities things called stock to flow, and that is what is the stock, how much of it is there out there versus how much is exchanged. So people talk a lot about that too. And stocks, they can just issue more stocks, but in order to get more crude, you actually need a very well-developed, kind of pipeline that usually takes years, if you will. Not a physical pipeline, but you have people out there looking for oil. You have all these test wells. Then wells prove to be productive. Most don't, even with today's technology. And then they kind of go forward, and then you get a barrel of oil. That's a huge investment versus like, we're going to IPO and file with the SEC. That's a much simpler process to get stock certificates.
Now, I want you to correct me here if I'm wrong, because this was not mentioned in the podcast directly, as far as, or the interview, as far as I can remember. But when you talk about stock and flow, the stock of the stock market, like the extant stocks, usually just grows continuously. Like stocks can be taken out of circulation, I think usually with share buybacks,
Yeah.
but brought out of the market. But I think for the most part, like the aggregate amount of purchasable stock grows. I don't know at what rate, but definitely linear or more.
I don't know either, but it can drop out too. If the price of a
Okay.
stock drops down too much, a market will delist it. Like the NYSE, the New York Stock Exchange. I think if it drops much below like $1 or whatever, or 10 cents, something like that, they will like delist your stock. They'll be like, this is not something we're interested in trading anymore. I think a lot of those, that's another way. That's basically the company is going bankrupt.
Right. But it's not as set in stone. A barrel of oil typically has a place that it needs to go to, right? Like the stock is getting consumed as soon as it can after it's produced. It's not just sitting around indefinitely. I don't know. It's an interesting conversation because before at a different episode of the program, I had lamented that markets are rigged and are fake and don't do anything. And when Canadian Prepper kind of floated that to Doomberg was like, okay, maybe the stock market, because there are so many participants that don't have a lot of information, like retail traders, and because of the nature and structure of the market, it's easy to pump prices and create bubbles and create irrational behavior. But the oil market, the people actually trading oil futures and setting up these contracts are grizzled veterans. The number of participants in that market that are actually buying and selling is a tiny slice of, SEAL Team 6 level traders compared to the giant set of people participating in the stock market. So the nature.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Okay, you keep going, and I'll just.
I was just saying that the properties of markets can be so different depending on their structure. You almost need to treat different markets. This is how my mental model is kind of evolving. You almost need to treat different markets like different elements on the periodic table, where they can have completely different emergent properties, even though they're all elements, right? Or they're all markets. The housing market,
Right.
the stock market, the oil market. I mean, these things are so different in their structure and composition that they are hard to be considered, to be analyzed analogously. That's my thought.
Totally. No, totally. I mean, they're completely different animals. I mean, even just looking at something, and I know there's a lot of members of our audience who have stopped listening because they have no understanding of what we're talking about. So let me just give you an example of one thing that illustrates what Don is talking about. So the housing market, which is something that we've talked about on the program before, physical houses, right? There's a market for those, right? There's a price that the seller puts up, and then there is a price that the buyers are interested in buying. Sometimes that is very consistent and analogous. That's when there's like a lot of liquidity in the housing market. It's like houses are selling for this and people have money to buy them, okay? But it is a discrete, large physical asset that you're actually transacting. And it usually takes, in most states, 30 to 60 days to actually clear a real estate transaction, okay? Versus a stock market, for example, the New York Stock Exchange, you can clear a trade usually within a few seconds because it's the exact same process of there's people who have stocks and there's people who have cash. There is what's called a spot price, which is you just buy it, and then you grab the asset and you give them the cash and it clears, and the governing body is the stock exchange. So that would be one example. Like the liquidity of the asset itself in the trade is it's easy to settle the trade. That would be one example of why markets are very different.
I would love to hear in the future or learn more about some other markets that I'm sure exhibit completely different traits because of their composition, like electricity, copper, labor. I mean, there's so many different markets that when I really take a step back, the underlying structure and forcing functions, as Doomberg says, are so different that they are kind of like, what's the right word? Sui generis. I don't know how to say that.
I have no idea what you're even referring to.
It's a pretentious Latin term that means of its own nature.
Yeah.
You
Do
were
you want
good
me
to point
you want
out
me to-
that we the poor audience. I hope you're still listening. To those who are still listening, you're the real ones. This is some nitty-gritty stuff. We appreciate you.
I think you want me to tell you this actually brings up an interesting opportunity that I have observed in life, and you pointed it out, so I'm just going to bring my interpretation to it. So you were like, he kept using the word forcing function. And having studied a little too much math in my day, I think that's a math term. And basically what that is that's like a term in solving typically like differential equations, partial differential equations as well, like all this whole class of math. And that's basically like energy getting pumped into the system or boundary conditions that are kind of forcing the evolution of something. So I think it's kind of one of those things, the step back, you're like, you can look at the words that people use and they kind of betray things about their training or their history. And it's like, this guy was obviously a quant trader because he is thinking about things in terms of this like big hardcore mathematical lens. And he's like, there's a forcing function. And he uses that term, but it's like, the reality of that is the oil goes bad. So you need to sell it. That's a forcing function. Like you need to use it, not sell it. You need to use it. And so that's kind of just for our audience, that's an interesting observation where if people are using terms in odd ways, you can kind of start to learn like, what's their history? Why are they using that term like that? Because it often means they know more about what they're talking about if they use a weird word like that than maybe you think they know.
Well, Brederick, I'm about to go on a rip here on a tangential topic that's not directly related. So if it's time to go to the next topic, you just give me the timeout signal. Be like, no, we've gone too far.
I think we should go to the next topic, man. I think we need to say
one more thing.
Topic.
I need to say one more thing about what you said.
Don't offer me an ultimatum and then not do the ultimatum. Okay,
you're right. Okay, next topic.
What's your last thing?
I was just going to say that math vocabulary, like you said, forcing function. Go to a party in San Francisco. You hear people saying manifold, orthogonal, stuff like that. I had to look up a lot of these terms, and that vocabulary does give you a richer conceptual understanding. Like I know last time on the program we talked about atoms and how you can know that they're real. I brought up the being able to take out a microscope and see cells and see paramecium. Your mental model is broadened by seeing the granular details. I think maybe the words like forcing function and some of this more sophisticated conceptual vocabulary, it almost seems like a microscope for systems. You're able to describe dynamic systems in more granular detail in their structure. And so I don't know if it makes me upset. Upset isn't the right word. It makes me feel I'm sad that more people, that this is considered hardcore math in the sense of something that's inaccessible to the wider population, because I would love for everyone to be able to describe systems, myself included, in detail and be able to look under the hood and not deal in reductive, broad concepts like all markets are the same. That's all I got to say. We're going to have to do another topic on another episode about math terminology that is actually helpful.
Well, I'll just comment on that finally, and then we can move on. But it's like, I mean, math is just another tool. Language is another tool to describe things, like actual natural language, right? Like English or Spanish or Chinese or something like that. And, I was just talking with my wife about this, how there are certain English words. As you learn more words, it allows you to express yourself more precisely. It's the same thing with math often, and that's the whole idea of like these better models. Like we're talking about, how do we better explain gravity? How do we better explain, electromagnetic forces, all these different things. And those come with, more expressive math. But in terms of your comment about a party in San Francisco, I mean, a lot of that is just pretension, but a lot of it is actually like descriptive. Like I remember very vividly, I took kind of a second class in linear algebra. You usually take like an intro one when you take like a differential equations class, and then often you'll take like a second one, which is like a real proper algebra class. fundamentally changed the way that I interact with the world. Like once I understood kind of what vector spaces were and all those things. So I would agree with you. I think things would be a lot clearer. People would be a lot more robust in terms of their thinking if they were to study more classical things like this. This was traditionally what was supposed to be a liberal education, like a liberal arts education. You were supposed to learn stuff like that.
You were